Hello, I'm Ruth Shogay, retired Dean of Library and Academic Technology for Washington College and an active member of the Chestertown community. The omnipresence of the iconic images of General George Washington, founding patron of Washington College, serves as a constant reminder of the institution's deep-rooted connection to the first President of the United States. Washington's statues, portraits, and signature grace many campus spaces and buildings, as well as our communications messaging. Indeed, his leadership ideals are embodied in our mission statement, which states Washington College shares these values of our founding patron, George Washington: integrity, determination, curiosity, civility, leadership, and moral courage. Nevertheless, contemporary awareness has led to a new, more nuanced and honest approach to the history of George Washington and his legacy. By deconstructing the history and images of the past, Washington College acknowledges its relationship with slavery and with George Washington, who, despite his privately conflicted views of the institution of slavery, fell short of stepping over the threshold to truly achieve liberty, freedom, and justice for all Americans. Behind me is our bronze statue of George Washington, overlooking the campus green with the historic hill dorms in the background. This statue is the most notable, visible reminder of our relationship to the nation's founding father. It was created by Lee Laurie and presented as a gift in commemoration of the 175th anniversary of Washington College. Ironically, this iconic image that crystallized in a very public way the bond between Washington College and George Washington was installed, coincidentally, at the dawn of the Civil Rights Movement in 1957. Since its installation, the statue has been regarded fondly as an ever-present guardian of the institution and the honored guest at every commencement, blessing every graduate as they leave the platform with a newly earned degree. Washington holds this special place for members of the college community because in 1782, Washington College, the first college of the new nation, was founded under the patronage of General George Washington, the first president of the new nation. In addition to giving his name to the college, the connection was further bolstered by his generous donation of 50 guineas, his membership on the Board of Visitors and Governors, and above all, his approval for the college to use his signature. For a small liberal arts college on the Chester River, Washington's generosity was a great honor. Washington College was the only institution of higher learning to which George Washington expressly gave his name. It was not until 2012 that Washington College first introduced Washington's signature as its primary branding identification with the launch of its redesigned website. In 2013, as part of the renovation of the college's visitor center, the illuminated signage of Washington's signature, you can see behind me, was installed at the public entrance of the Casey Academic Center. Right now, I'm standing beside the bronze bust of George Washington outside the Hudson Hall Commons. The bust was a gift of the class of 2000, commemorating the 200th anniversary of Washington's death. It is ironic that this statue commemorating his death marks another event for the descendants of the enslaved at Mount Vernon. In his life and up to the time of his death, Washington was surrounded by his enslaved persons. Though he contemplated publicly and privately ways of resolving the institution of slavery, he failed to act on them, and it was not until his death that he willed freedom to those he personally enslaved. So, in a strange twist of fate, This bust, gifted in 2000, marked 200 years since Washington declared his 123 enslaved persons to be freed. However, they remained the property of his wife, Martha, until 1801. Sculpted by artist Evard Fairbanks, the bust is identical to the bust of George Washington's universities in Washington, D.C., and George Washington's Mount Vernon, his former plantation. In an effort to tell the unvarnished truth about the history, Washington College is now confronting events in its past by examining its icons and their social and economic relationship with the institution of slavery and the treatment of the indigenous citizens of America. Through the process of discovery, we acknowledge that it is not enough to say that Washington is not a product or man of his time, a time in the history of America when the enslavement of peoples of African descent was firmly stitched into the social and economic fabric of the American society. Washington owned a number of enslaved persons until his death. Like others, Washington benefited economically and personally from the labor of enslaved persons, yet he failed to acknowledge publicly the common humanity he shared with his enslaved workers and indigenous people. The genuine care and loyalty demonstrated by enslaved persons close to him were evident in the likes of the trusted valet William Lee, who served as Washington's attendant throughout the Revolutionary War. In addition to his other duties, Lee was also a rower in the famous crossing of the Delaware River during the War of Revolution. Enslaved persons desired and fought for the same ideals of liberty and freedom that Washington upheld. The enslaved yearned for their freedom from slavery, and many of them for the freedom of the nation. And it is for these reasons they joined the Revolutionary War under the leadership of General George Washington. With all of his considerable influence, Washington took no substantive steps to abolish the institution of slavery that he privately denounced. While the act of physically freeing enslaved peoples happened in 1866, the difficult task of undoing the effects remains and permeates every aspect of our lives today. While Washington College confronts its past connections to slavery and its deep connection to George Washington and many of his ideals, we summon the moral courage to acknowledge and, unlike Washington, confront the past inequities and practices that emerged from slavery. According to Brian Stevenson, the real evil of slavery is the ideology of racial differences that it created in the American society. Changing that ideology to one of equality and justice for all is a challenge that requires time and the united efforts of the campus community. Goose Nation, yes, you can.